competition. And
well,
competition amongst men is fine.
Yeah.
Competition with men against women is often thought of as cruel.
Yeah, well, yes, well, and there's a certain amount of reason for that as well, because obviously physical competition it's easy for that to border on cruel.
This is why we were talking before the show that instead of calling people men and women when referring to because there's this very disturbing, in my opinion, trend of transgender women entering into these competitions now with women who are biologically female and dominating them. Yeah. And that instead of calling people men and women, let's dispense with that.
Yeah, you can be
yeah. So, yeah. Trans athletes. There is no direct or consistent research suggesting transgender female individuals or male individuals have an athletic advantage at any stage of their transition. Includes cross-sex hormones, gender-confirming surgery. Competitive sport policies that place restrictions on transgender people need to be considered and potentially revised. Additional findings show most sports policies are not evidence-based and trans individuals experience substantial discriminations from sports institutions. Any athletic advantages a transgender girl or woman arguably may have as a result of her prior testosterone levels dissipate after about 1 year of estrogen therapy. According to medical experts on this issue, the assumption that a transgender girl or woman competing on a woman's team would have a competitive advantage outside the range of performance and competitive advantage or disadvantage that already exists among female athletes is not supported by evidence. There are countless studies to back the fact that this is not a disturbing trend. Joe Rogan. This is a societal progress occurring.
Man or a woman.
Just say what
you can be a man or a woman. That's your choice, and you can change it whenever you want. So you're a man or a woman, and that's your choice. But we're going to have a new rule, which is that if you have an XY chromosome, so you're an XY person or an XX person, then if you're an XY person, you don't get to engage in physical combat with an XY person.
Yes.
Men or
with
woman.
An XX person.
Doesn't matter.
Yes.
Yeah. How would that be?
If you're XY, you can't
Sounds like a sneaky way of being transphobic, though.
Engage in physical combat with XX.
That's right. XYs cannot hit XXs. How's that? And maybe they can't run in running contests against them, and maybe they can't play tennis against them. Not within, and maybe that's just reasonable. Right?
It is reasonable.
Yeah.
Maybe it's not backed up by the evidence.
It is certainly reasonable.
It is reasonable, but if you talk about that, especially someone like you who you were against this bill that was going to enforce these pronouns and the compelling the use of these pronouns, that you're thought to be a transphobic person because you feel like there maybe should be some rational discussion about the physical limitations of certain body structures, because that's what it is. If you're talking about my field of business, you're talking about combat sports.
Right.
I've been involved in combat sports my whole...
Maybe if you work in a university, you should know about the research behind these things before you talk about them on the internet to millions of people.
And there is a difference, and it's not to say that females aren't competent. And I mean, I had Miriam Nakamoto on yesterday. She's a good friend of mine. She's an 8-time world Muay Thai champion. I mean, she's a monster. But she doesn't fight against men, and she shouldn't fight against men. Although she probably could beat a bunch of them.
Right. It's
not. She shouldn't have to. And she's
a tough woman can beat a variety of men.
Oh, yes.
But a really tough man can beat all women.
Yes.
Right. So that's the problem.
That's the reality.
Yes, that is definitely the reality.
You know, and people don't like to hear these things, and they want to pretend that you can even out the playing field with hormones. No, you can even it a little.
No, you can even it completely, as we've seen. I didn't realize this was about trans athletes, but I'm glad I have the research document pulled up anyway, because, like, it takes a year, and any athletic advantage dissipates after a year. It's not a little.
certain things, like I've always said, if you gave Brock Lesnar a sex change and put him in a dress, he's going to run through every woman that's ever lived in the history of women. There's not a single woman that's going to be able to deal with that bone structure and that mind that guy has had with testosterone pumping through it for 39 years. It's just
preposterous that we even have to have the discussion. It's so absolutely ridiculous.
Well, what's ridiculous is that you guys are talking about it with these uneducated opinions on the internet to your millions of fans.
One thing that I was attacked on more than anything in my entire life is saying that I think it's ridiculous to have a trans woman compete against women and mix.
Maybe that's because you were wrong, Joe Rogan. Maybe that's the reason why you were attacked so much for that.
Martial arts. I was like, you want to have them do it in chess? You want to have them do it in something that's non-physical? Sure. You want them to be a woman? Yes, okay. You want them to be recognized as a woman? You sure. But as soon as you're compelling people, like here's one that's going up lately. If you don't want to date a trans woman, then you're some sort of a bigot. Mm-hmm. That if you're a man, even if you want a family.
You remember.
Nobody's arguing that. Nobody's arguing that if you don't date a trans girl because that you can't have a family with her, or you don't date a trans girl because she has a penis. Nobody's arguing that is transphobic at all. No one.
In Brave New World, in Huxley's book, it was considered immoral to reject anyone's sexual advances because it was prejudicial.
Oh, yes.
And the thing is, it is prejudicial. That's the thing. Now, so that makes the question even more interesting, because the question is, at what point do you have the right to your prejudices?
Right.
And one of the things that we seem to cling to, and I would say...
Well, I think before your prejudices harm others is a fine line to draw in society.
Is that we're allowed to be prejudiced when it comes to who we interact with sexually. And who we choose as friends, and that's right. That's the right to association. And you say,
but only up to a certain point.
Well,
this is because this new logic is kind of leaking into even sexual preference now. Like if you have a problem with someone being overweight.
Yeah.
It's not a new logic. It's just we're trying to be inclusive in a true way that actually fixes societal issues.
Then you're a sizist or something like that. Like, what is that?
Well, the thing is that you can't have preferences without having prejudices.
Of course, yeah.
Right, and so that's a big issue.
Nobody's arguing that your genital preference or whatever is bigotry.
What does that mean? You don't get to have any preferences? How's that going to work out?
In terms of what you like to eat or what kind of films you enjoy or what kind of books you read, you're allowed to have these preferences. But when it comes to what you're sexually attracted to, there's new emphasis now on trying to draw that line. And
no, you literally are entitled to that. The only way that would be transphobic is if the only reason why you didn't date or have sex with a person is because of the fact that they are trans, not because of the fact that they have a dick or can't give you children.
And say, but it's preposterous people that are pushing this, and almost everybody's pushing back. But I find it interesting when these things come up.
It's a logical conclusion to all these other things that have been happening, because that is where the rubber hits the road. It's like, I've seen this in debates that I've had publicly where people, talk about prejudice, and I've pointed out to them that they have prejudicial attitudes with regards to their sexual preferences because they don't just sleep with anyone who asks them.
Right.
So it's like, well, how's that not a prejudice? Well, of course it's a prejudice. Well, then the question is...
Well, are you using that to defend all prejudice, Jordan Peterson? What the fuck are you talking about?
Under what circumstances are prejudices justifiable? And that's a conversation we don't like to have, because we believe that there are no circumstances whatsoever under which prejudices are acceptable.
There's a big difference between prejudices and discrimination. I think those two get conflated.
Yes, there is a big difference between prejudice and discrimination.
Right.
And also, hopefully discrimination has to do with setting your standards in relationship to the task at hand.
Yes.
Right? That's what you'd hope for. That's the appropriate form of discrimination.
Right.
That's like intelligence.
Sure.
Everything isn't the same about everything all the time. So you
have a
discriminate.
bunch of stupid dude bros who are like, I rejected a trans girl. I'm so intelligent because Daddy Lobster Man told me so. It's like God.
You rank order things, and you need to rank order them even to pursue things that are valuable.
The only real irresponsible people in this entire situation are Joe Rogan and Jordan Peterson, by the way, because, like, as we've seen, the research disagrees with them. And yeah, I don't even want to show the comments section of this bullshit, and I can't believe I used to be a fan of this bullshit. My God.